This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The 80th anniversary of D-Day has been commemorated with events in Portsmouth and in northern France. Labour and the Conservatives have continued to clash over the cost of their policies following last night's leaders' debate. And the First Minister of Wales, Vaughan Gething, has lost a vote of no confidence put forward by the Conservatives. Good evening, you're watching the press preview. It's a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive, and it's time to see what's making the headlines with our political journalist Zoe Grunewald and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor Claire Ellicott. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Let's have a look at the Mail first and foremost. Beg your pardon, the Metro pictures the Queen, who became emotional at the 80th anniversary commemorations in Portsmouth today. And yes, the Mail also reports on the moving ceremony which moved the Queen to tears. The Daily Mirror leads on a simple message to those who served and those who died: thank you. 99-year-old veteran Peter Smoothie features on the front page of The Express, standing on Juno Beach in Normandy. Their headline, eternally in their debt. And indeed, their sister paper, The Star, has an almost identical headline. Moving to election news now, the Financial Times reports on those disagreements over taxes. The Conservatives have insisted that Labour tax policies would leave families £2,000 a year every 4 years. We'll determine that a bit later. Are worse off, and their numbers were put together by independent civil servants. But a letter from the Treasury has now seemingly contradicted that. On the front of The Guardian, Starmer accuses Sunak of lying to the UK over tax and spend plans. While on the front page of The Eye, at last, a real plan to save Britain's rivers. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt writes in Thursday's Daily Telegraph, issuing Sir Keir Starmer a challenge to explicitly rule out property tax increases if Labour wins the general election. While the Times leads with a story on the Prime Minister, who the paper says will pledge the biggest overhaul of homicide laws in a generation to ensure tougher sentences for domestic abusers. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on your screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. So we're joined tonight by Zoe Grunewald and Claire Ellicott. So let's have a look at the Mail to begin with. Claire, your paper. Eternal debt is the headline, and we're seeing a picture of the Queen there. In fact, on several of the papers, several of tomorrow's front pages, moved to tears. Because what we've seen today, I'm sure what we'll see tomorrow as well, moving stuff.
Of course, and it's dominating the front pages for good reason. You've got the Queen, you can see tears welling up in her eyes. She's just been speaking to a serviceman who's 98-year-old Eric Bateman, who lost his friend as he was crossing over, his best friend. And you can see, I think the King was moved to tears as well, listening to his story. But it's a poignant reminder of what these people went through to guarantee our freedoms now. And, you know, it's 80 years on since this huge event, and it turned the tide on the war. And I think King Charles has said elsewhere that he hopes that everyone learn their lesson from this and that, you know, history will remember it so that we never go through anything like this ever again.
It was do or die, Zoe, and it features on the front page of the Metro tomorrow as well. Emotional Queen, their headline. I think what brings it home is how fresh the memories seem to be in the minds of people in their 90s, even in their hundreds, all these years later.
Yeah, I mean, as Claire was saying, it's an extraordinary thing that these people have been through, and you can imagine that they think about it probably every single day. Something like fighting in a war, it stays with you. It's a really horrendous ordeal, but of course we all owe them a huge debt of gratitude. I think what's really evocative about this and emotional is the fact that these people are getting older, they're getting fewer. With them, the memory of the events and what happened disappears. And so it's so important that we keep telling their story and we preserve those lessons so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and we don't repeat those violent histories. We're in an increasingly unstable time geopolitically. And I think more than ever, it seems that this has really hit home with people.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, isn't there? People are used to seeing it via screens, via dramatisations. People will be watching the wars around the world now from their phones, not realising the horrendous reality of the situation. So when you hear those stories being shared verbally, reminding us that this was within living memory for the time being, that's what brings it home. And we see on the Daily Express, Claire, another, well, veteran, 99-year-old veteran at Normandy. And that's a powerful image back there again.
And this is where they landed just to begin the assault against Nazi Germany. And the fact is that we have war on Europe's shores again with Ukraine and Russia. And there is no real guarantee that that won't spread further. Obviously, NATO allies are really worried. Places like Poland massively upped their defence spending because it is a real prospect that something terrible like this could happen again. And it means so much, I think, to the King. He had a really poignant speech about this, but his warning is real. You know, this could happen again, and we need to all be alive to that. And, you know, this is just the perfect memory, having these pictures on every front page. These people gave up so much, and in the hope that we would never have to go through this.
Russia was an ally back then. It isn't now, and it won't be there tomorrow, though Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine is, of course, attending tomorrow's commemorations. Let's move on to the election coverage, Zoe. Front page of tomorrow's Financial Times continues with this kerfuffle over tax policy.
So obviously last night in the debate there was this big claim made by Rishi Sunak, I think he made it 13 or 14 times, that Labour would cost the average British family £2,000 in tax rises. Starmer was too slow to dispute that. And that has allowed the story to run and run. Now today we know a senior Treasury official has come out and said, actually, those figures weren't independent and they're not quite correct. But it's almost like the horse has bolted. People are still talking about that. The front page says, Labour, £2,000 tax rise. People will read that. We're 5 weeks away from a general election. And that is the fear for the Labour Party, that these myths or these stories that the Labour Party is irresponsible with money, they increase public spending, they cost families more, they're so pervasive and it continues. And I think this is exactly the kind of headline that Keir Starmer will not be wanting today.
And Claire, throughout the day, we've been getting more detail, or not, as the case may be, on this claim of more than £2,000 added to people's tax bills, whether it's in a year, as I think the Prime Minister said during the debate last night, or whether it's over 4 years. Claire Coutinho today seems to be saying something entirely different. It's confusing. There's a lot of smoke. Is there fire, though?
Well, I mean, we're all talking about it, which was the whole purpose of mentioning it so many times.
But we can't not talk about it, can we?
Of course.
The government have made this claim about the opposition, knowing full well that we have to talk about it. But as my colleague Ed Conway spelled out there, they're coming up with sums that don't seem entirely plausible.
Yes, I think what's strange about this one is that Rishi Sunak really did land those blows last night. He kept repeating that figure again. And Keir Starmer was far too slow to shut him down. He was far too slow to say, you know, this has been put in and this is what they've got out, and this has been put into the Treasury and this is what they've got out. So he allowed it to he allowed the hares to start running. And we're all talking about it today. It has strong vibes of, you know, buses during the Brexit campaign, 350 million spent on the NHS. We're all talking, is Labour going to cost you £2,000? And what the people at home here is this figure. And the more people dispute it, the more it's talked about, actually, the better for the Tories. I think that what's interesting about this case is that this is not something Labour hasn't done. So we were summoned to an emergency press conference last week by Darren Jones, who would be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury if Labour win the election, to announce that the Tories were going to cost every home, they were going to cost £72 billion. And they'd taken loads of promises, like the Tories saying, oh, we'd like to scrap national insurance at some point when the economic conditions allow. And they'd costed it in the first year. So obviously we've got to all these billions of pounds. So there is a lot of nonsense being bandied around, and actually, at least the Tory claims are based on real figures. Obviously, James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, has said that they didn't come up with the final sort of presentation of the figures, but they were calculated based on Labour policies.
Based on the Labour policies they know about, but people don't necessarily know an awful lot about Labour's spending policies overall. It's interesting, isn't it? The former Cabinet Secretary, the most senior civil servant in the country, Gus O'Donnell, who worked through Tory and Labour governments, said he did this kind of thing for both and hated it whenever he had to do it.
Yeah,
but they all do these kind of costings against their opposition. Let's have a look at the Telegraph, because, look, it's quite telling on the front pages, as it always is, what they think about the election, whether they are covering this argument over tax or not. The Telegraph instead, well, it's talking about the Chancellor throwing down the gauntlet on property tax to Labour. What's he saying, Claire?
So Jeremy Hunt has issued a challenge to Labour to match the Tories' new pledge on spending on homes. So they've guaranteed that the Tories have guaranteed that they won't put up capital gains tax, stamp duty or change council tax ban. And he's now asking Labour to make the same guarantee. What they did this last week with VAT, they said, oh, we're not going to put up VAT. But Labour would, and Labour were forced to come out and say, no, we won't put up that. So this is Jeremy Hunt. He says he's doing it for the good of the country, because obviously we know where Labour are in the opinion polls. He says he's doing it for the good of the country. He wants Labour to guarantee that it won't change taxes around houses. But again, it feeds into this idea, you know, Tories want to be the part. They have always traded on their reputation as a party of the economy. And Labour, that's always been their weak point. We saw Jeremy Corbyn, the magic money tree, everything like that. So they're trying to bring that back and ask questions around what Labour would do around tax. The more Labour talk about it, they don't want to rule anything out. They don't want to rule anything in because, frankly, they're so far ahead in the polls that they want to play it safe. And this is the Tories trying to draw them out and work out what they would do. It
looks like it's Jeremy Hunt's turn to be doing the rounds. This is pitch rolling, because I think he's in The Guardian tomorrow as well, or certainly has spoken to them because it's online this evening, and they take a different tack in terms of he seems quite sanguine about Conservatives not necessarily having the strongest chance of winning, but still is trying to, you know, go down fighting potentially.
It's a hard gig to come out and bat for a party that is so obviously going to lose, and not just going to lose, but is probably going to lose in quite a historic and embarrassing way.
Our polling suggests that, yes.
Yes, well, a lot of polling suggests that, unfortunately, for the Tories. I think, just to go back to the point Claire was making about taxes, what is disappointing to see from both parties, I would say, is that both parties are kind of competing over who can be the most responsible with tax. But the reality is that there are such pressures on our public services in this country. No party is really being realistic about the state of public finances. In actual fact, there is no way we can go on with the system we have unless you have mass cuts to public services or you massively increase taxes. The Conservatives can afford to be cheeky and politically expedient here. They can say, we're not going to raise tax, because they're not going to win. But Labour probably do know that they need to be really careful with the promises they make now, because they may end up having to break them.
Or borrow.
Or
just print more money, which has been done in the past.
That's what I would do.
Or maybe the economy will get really good and everyone will be fine.
Well, that would be nice for everybody, wouldn't it? Thank you so much for the time being. Now, a new poll suggests Reform are gaining on the Tories, but is it down to the Farage factor? We'll be talking about that next.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me in the studio, Zoe Grunewald and Claire Ellicott. Let's continue to have a look at tomorrow's papers, Zoe. More election stuff on the Telegraph, and it shows that Reform are gaining in a new poll. And just to put it in context of people, Reform have consistently been polling in kind of third place, just ahead of the Lib Dems. But the Telegraph say they're making gains. Is this to do with Nigel Farage becoming the leader and running in Clacton, not Clapton?
I'm sure it probably is, or at least that's how Nigel Farage would put it. Polls at this point say a lot of things, and they bounce around, and we were expecting that there would be a boost to Reform's approval ratings if Farage were to come back as leader or say he's going to run as an MP, and that's exactly what he's done. And, you know, it's hard to tell if this is just a kind of Farage-esque bounce that will cool down as the polls tighten, or if actually Reform are really gaining on the Conservatives. And there's something really important about the Conservatives' loss of votes, which is that either people are deserting the Tories and moving to Labour, or they're deserting to the Tories and moving towards Reform UK. And that really depends on where they fall on certain things like Brexit, culture war stuff. And, you know, Reform have, I think, quite a good chance. If you know, I don't necessarily think they're going to make huge gains and may not get any seats, but they're definitely going to rattle some cages, and they could make a real damaging dent in the Conservatives' vote share. It's interesting because Jeremy Hunt, I think in that Guardian interview I was talking about, Claire, says elections are won at the centre. But actually you can see from this polling that you lose votes on the periphery. So is it right-wing Tory voters thinking, actually, I'm going to give Reform a go?
Well, it does look that way. So you've got Reform overtaking the Tories in the north of England and them being ahead of Labour among the over 65s. Now, they're like the Tories' traditional... So, sorry, just to go back, the Red Wall Tories in the north, they're the ones who didn't ever belong to the Tories. Boris Johnson sort of pinched them back over Brexit. They were always traditional Labour voters. And they're the people who, for the first time in a generation, voted Tory. And actually, the Tories have lost their attention, and now they're turning to Reform. And that's a really interesting pivot. But most of the seats in the country do tend, you know, elections are won on the centre ground.
Yes.
Most of the seats in the country aren't reflective of that. And I think that the Tories are obviously trying to fight this election on the economy. They're not going after Brexit or any of the other kind of fringe, you know, migration or anything like that. So they are trying to keep it on the centre ground, but the fact is the Tories have lost all of their traditional voters. They're doing really badly in the polls, and Reform are creaming those off. Now, I think a lot of that is to do with the Farage bounce, but he stood for election 8 times. This will be his 8th time, and he's never won a seat.
UKIP polled well as well.
Yeah,
but winning
Brexit
seats
party,
with our system is
you know.
difficult. Zoe, I just want to quickly finish off on this story in the Times, page 2. Is Britain ready for another war? This sounds kind of concerning, very quickly.
Yes, so, well, the answer is no, according to this general who stepping down after 2 years in post. And he says that although the Second World War may feel like ancient history to young people, a conflict on that scale could never happen again, and that Britain should be far better prepared for a war like it. And this obviously comes off the back of a lot of conversations, increasing conversations about the geopolitical circumstances we find ourselves in, increasing unrest in Europe, in the Middle East, and whether Britain, with its, you know, trimmed down defence spending, can really have the same sort of position and place in the world it used to. And more people who are in the know are saying, I don't think so.
Thanks both now for the time being. Let's take a quick look at the weather now. And the next few days are going to look unsettled with widespread showers or longer spells of rain, although the south will be mainly dry. We mostly fine weather if a rather chilly start tomorrow, but there will be showers around mainly over northern and western coastal counties. Showers will develop much more widely through the morning, but there'll be some good sunny spells as well. The showers will be concentrated across Scotland, where some thundery downpours are again possible. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, all the latest on today's D-Day events, which are still going on tonight.